Barbie is quickly becoming one of the most divisive and acclaimed movies of the year, with some calling the movie an outstanding representation of the struggles women must go through, while others call it misandrist propaganda made to brainwash the next generation of women. But I'm not going to be talking about that. Nope, I'm going to talk about Ken, the unsung hero of this movie, who will fit nicely as the newest addition to the literally me cast of male icons. If you haven't seen Barbie yet, spoilers ahead. For those of you who don't know, Ken is the antagonist of the film. He starts off as a lovesick accessory to Barbie, doing whatever he can to be noticed by her more than she notices the other Kens, and is so determined to spend some time with her that he goes as far as to hide in Barbie's car so that he can accompany her on her journey to the real world. But once they get to the real world, Barbie is appalled at what she sees and sees the worst humanity has to offer, while Ken discovers the so-called patriarchy. You see, in Barbie Land, where Barbie and Ken live, Barbies have complete unquestioned control over everything. They control the government, they control who has jobs, they control who lives there, while the Kens only exist as a second-class species to cheer on the Barbies, be backup dancers for the Barbies, and act as the accessories as they were always designed to be. So when Ken is brought to the real world and discovers what it's like to be respected, it's the biggest dopamine rush of his life, and he goes back to Barbie Land and establishes the patriarchy, where the Kens rule everything and the Barbies are made into servants for the Kens, making him into the supposed villain of the movie. But if you even think about this for a couple of minutes, can you really blame him? In the movie, when he first discovers the patriarchy, Ken is told "excuse me" as a man walks in front of him, and to him, this is odd. He then sees men exercising together, sees ads where men have careers, sees that men have been president, and to top all of this off, a woman asks him for the time. Now, all this may seem inconsequential, but consider the fact that he was so surprised by these things. If he's surprised, that means these are things that he has never experienced. Someone has enough respect for him to say "excuse me" as they cut in front of him, or think he's competent enough to know what time it is? These aren't acts of the patriarchy. These are acts of common decency which he has never experienced in Barbie Land. The Kens are so looked down upon that being cut in front of with no apology or never being respected enough to be asked for something as basic as the time just goes to show how terribly the Kens are treated in Barbie Land. He sees men hyping each other in the gym, high-fiving, and supporting each other, as opposed to Barbie Land where the Kens do nothing but compete with each other for Barbie's attention. If you think about living in Barbie Land from Ken's perspective, this is about as dystopian of a society as one can imagine, and Kens are fine with it because they have never had the opportunity to experience anything else. So put yourself in Ken's shoes. Do you A. continue trying to win over your oppressor's admiration? B. escape into this free world and live a better life than you could ever have imagined? Or C. go back to a land where everything is designed to oppress you and liberate the Kens who have been nothing but obstacles keeping you away from getting the one thing you've wanted your entire life? Well, Ken, the absolute legend he is, picks the most altruistic option of the bunch and goes back to Barbie Land. Admittedly, he does try to go for option B at first, and if he had continued with that choice he would have eventually succeeded, but I digress. Ken returns to Barbie Land, and successfully liberates the Kens and establishes a new solidarity among them. But this is where he makes a mistake. You see, Ken didn't even get a full day in the real world to learn of the complications and nuances accompanying it. For most of his life he's only known extremes. He only knows totalitarianism, as that is the society the Barbies had established and he had been raised in. So once he establishes his Kendom, he does the very thing the Barbies did to the Kens and makes them into servants. Now keep in mind, he did not do this with malevolent intent. He never treats them as disrespectfully as the Barbies did, but merely sees them as objects because he doesn't know any better, since, again, he has only been exposed to extremism his entire life. Eventually, the Barbies overthrow the Kens and do so by taking advantage of the aspect of the Kens that was built into them by design. The Barbies turn the Kens against each other by exploiting their love for Barbie. Once again, I want you to think about that. The Barbies, the supposed heroes of the movie, turn the Kens against each other by pretending to love them just so they can break their hearts so that they get jealous and turn on each other. And this is where you realize that the Kens have something that the Barbies don't: love and empathy.
I have feelings that I can't explain. They're driving me insane.
When you compare Barbieland to the Kendom, the glaring difference between the two is one ruling class treats the lower class like nuisances, so far as seeing them as superfluous, while the other actively tries to spend time with the other by performing romantic gestures, respecting them enough to talk about their interests with them, and going as far as taking time out of their day to help them when they are having difficulty with an activity. The Kens are more humane to the Barbies under their rule than the Barbies ever were to the Kens under theirs. All these interactions they have with the Barbies are all the Kens ever wanted. They treat the Barbies the exact way they wanted to be treated when they served them. The Kens never had an issue with being second-class citizens or serving the Barbies. They just wanted to spend some meaningful time with them once in a while. Now at this point of the movie, the Kens are at war with each other out of jealousy. There are no Barbies around, it's just the Kens. The Kens begin to fight, but because Kens are inherently more affectionate and compassionate, instead of destroying each other, their solidarity with each other becomes stronger than it ever was before, since they all want the same thing and have all shared the same feelings of just wanting to be cared about by a Barbie. Unfortunately, the Barbies have already re-established power and have returned to being the ruling matriarchs. There are few things crueler than getting what you want for a short period of time only to have it taken away from you, and Ken can't handle it and breaks down. And while many may feel like this is a humiliating moment for Ken, it serves a very important purpose. By showing this public anguish, the Barbies see the effects their disrespect has had on the Kens for the countless number of years they have been in power, and because of this, as it is insinuated by the narrator of the movie, the Barbies eventually decide to give Kens some equal rights, finally creating the equality that the Kens deserve. If it hadn't been for Ken's emotional outburst, the Barbies would have never realized how badly the Kens have wanted to be respected, because the Kens have always been yes men to the Barbies and have acted like they are fine with how they treat them. The movie ends off with a Barbie that Ken had spent his entire life chasing after, telling Ken that he doesn't need her, and that he needs to find a purpose that doesn't revolve around trying to win over the Barbies, and after hearing this, Ken realizes that he isn't defined by his relationship with Barbie, and that the person he should care the most about is himself. So I ask you, do you think Ken is really the villain of this movie? The man who turned away at the opportunity of freedom to go back to the Barbie dystopia to liberate the Kens who have been nothing more than his enemies his entire life, and give them the same freedom that he had experienced? The man who, after having the woman he spent his entire life humiliating himself for, having been taken away from him by another Ken that he had previously liberated, only then in the heat of battle to put aside any past transgressions and stand side by side, hand in hand in complete solidarity? The man who, in the face of losing his freedom, was able to see past the returning dark age of oppression and give up the woman he has always wanted so that he can be a shining example of self-respect that the other Kens can look up to. It's easy to miss these themes in a movie that spends so much of the runtime shoving feminist messages down your throat, painting a sexist dystopia as a utopia, and trying its hardest to frame the obvious hero of the movie as the villain. Ken is many things. He may be stupid, he may spend a lot of his time simping for a woman that treats him with disrespect, he may have been misguided in enslaving the Barbies, he may have been tricked by the Barbies, but what he is not is a villain. Ken is a liberator, an inspiration, a hero, and the most important character in the Barbie movie. Oh, and by the way, Ken shares a near identical story with Anakin Skywalker from Star Wars. Just imagine the Jedi as the Barbies and the patriarchy as the Sith.